Hello, my name's Elijah Wells, and today's review is Bong Joon Ho's new movie, Mickey 17. The movie follows Mickey Barnes, who's played by Robert Pattinson in this movie, who joins a space colony, and as he's joined in as an expendable. An expendable is basically a disposable worker whose work is to essentially die and get reprinted as a human clone, biologically get reprinted. And the jobs include basically any missions with a very high chance of him dying, or tests like chemical weapons or nerve gas or vaccines on him, which often resulted in him dying. So, after dying repeatedly, Mickey 17, which the movie largely follows, does come back after being presumed dead when trying to retrieve a crawler, which is the aliens that inhabit the icy planet that the space colony is based on. He returns to his base to only find there's a new clone of him, Mickey 18, being portrayed by Robert Pattinson, of course. And of course, the laws of duplicates is that they are extremely forbidden in cloning and in the real world, just because of some backstory that does happen in this movie. So it becomes a trial of test and error of see how long can they get away with this, and how can they get into the good and not so good graces of Mark Ruffalo's character, who's the president of this space colony. Being Bong Joon Ho's first film in 6 years after Parasite, but looking back in his career, after making it big in the Korean scene, particularly with his film Memories of a Murder, which came out in 2003, he did a slew of other successful films, like most notably in the 2006 Host, then transitioned towards more English language territory with films like Snowpiercer and Okja. But in 2019, we'll just say one movie pretty much radicalized the 2010s film scenes and pretty much put him on the spotlight and made him a household name. It's Parasite. Like, it was probably, if not one of the most consequential films of all time, and the most consequential film of the 2010s. It won Palme d'Or, the first Korean film to do so. It won Best Foreign Film in the Oscars, the first Korean film to do that, but most importantly, it won Best Picture. The first foreign language film, and currently only ever foreign language film to do that, which was extremely extraordinary, and even so for today, like, even the consequences of that alone was a massive. Like, it's number 9 of Letterboxd's greatest films of all time, between Shawshank Redemption and Yi Yi, and it's somewhere in the top 25 or top 50 of IMDb's greatest films of all time. Like, the legacy of Parasite was so big, like, pretty much very few films could compare it to at that point, with that level of excellency. So much so, for me personally, I put it's one of my all-time favourite movies when that film came out while I was at university. Like, for a very long time, it was the most viewed film on my channel before the review on Inside Out 2 and my defense for physical media. Well, anywho, that movie was just on an unparalleled level of success. So, naturally, he could do whatever he wanted to do. So, it did take some time, not just because of the pandemic, and of course the strikes that happened in Hollywood that essentially delayed a lot of things, and that he wanted to do some other things, like an animated movie about the sea life, which had Werner Herzog as voice actor, which he's still apparently doing. Of course, Mickey 17 is here, so let's talk about it. So I wanted to get this review right, so I had the Sight and Sound magazine mailed in for me. This time it was interviewing and doing a review of Bong Joon Ho's Mickey 17. Of course, it does do an interview of Bong Joon Ho, and it does tell some really telling things about the movie, like death becomes him, and him having some pretty flowers that he has in his hand. But it does tell us a lot of interesting things, like, even though this is based on a novel by Ashton Edwards, being Mickey 7, he does acknowledge that this is going to be somewhat of a loose adaptation of this movie. So much so, he does say in an interview with Sight and Sound magazine that he could have went up to 27 or 47 in this movie, and wanted to go onto the theme of, like, biological recycling, and of course being dumped into a lava pool, like he always done. But of course, I think 27 would be one too many, so Mickey 17 was, of course, a natural way to go through. And of course, the movie does explore the film's politics a little bit. Of course, the interview does respond to the film's politics a little bit more, particularly the movie's president being Kenneth Marshall's being portrayed by Mark Ruffalo. It is actually based off the recently unseated South Korean president Yoon Suk-yeol, who, if you remember a few months ago, he got arrested for declaring martial law in South Korea and got a lot of South Koreans really, really angry. So much so, he pretty much locked himself in his house, refused to answer questions, and pretty much right now has an impeachment against him. He's pretty much being investigated with police right now, so it's a little bit telling. So much so that he denounced the presidency right after the attempted coup happened. So he officially says that, but he also did said in a Stephen Colbert interview that when he showed it in different countries, like in Germany, particularly with the election that just happened there, apparently a lot of people said that they projected their worst leaders, like their worst political leaders, onto Mark Ruffalo's character, which was, again, very interesting to hear about them. He also did talk about the irony of hiring like political actors like Mark Ruffalo to play essentially a far-right character. Like, it's somewhat ironic, let's say, like David Lynch being playing John Ford in Fablesman, since David Lynch is left-wing and John Ford was right-wing, which the interviewer somewhat debunked a little bit, saying that John Ford did go progressive later on in his career, and despite David Lynch supporting Bernie in his latest political campaign, he had since stayed away from politics in a lot of his films, including, surprisingly, like Blue Velvet or Twin Peaks, which I found somewhat surprising. And of course, it did talk a lot about the development of the film, but I feel like what's a little bit more telling about the movie in its review, like being done right there, where it does talk about the film's politics a lot more. Saying that Mark Ruffalo's character being Kenneth Marshall, who's a failed politician who has a wounded narcissism and a cranky colonizing obsession, same as like Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And also that his followers wear like red baseball hats with his slogans on them, which was similar to his supporters with the Make America Great Again hats, which was also very surprising. And essentially, and also does round up saying that Mark Ruffalo's character is essentially a tech fantasticist who dreams about colonizing like Greenland, Canada, and the Panama Canals. Basically, it's a combination of both Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which again, Science Sound did a brilliant job, like comparing the two. One president and one egomaniac who pretty much is so high on ketamine that is making a good case of why billionaires should not be using Twitter at this point. So, Sight and Sound, congratulations. So let's get on to the movie proper. The movie also does look into class divide, which does play into Bong Joon Ho's strengths, as it does write itself large in this movie, as well as his other films like Snowpiercer and Parasite. The movie, how it depicts, of course, class divide is that all the Mickeys, being Mickey 17, 18, all live in a very small, dark, very crummy-like room in a space colony upon a spaceship, which is, again, filled with pipes, filled with dirty stairs, and everyone just kind of hangs out a little bit. It's basically the really dirty, crummy apartment, very low rent, probably a very rough area as well. So, and it's also being placed into juxtaposition, let's say, Mark Ruffalo's character and Tony Cornell's character, Yap and Marshalls, who basically live a very lavish lifestyle and often brag about their sources, eat a lot of steak, and listen to a lot of Christian music. It's also a much more lovely place to look at, and also a lot more colourful as well. Which is also have like a lot of assistants like around them at all times, which is somewhat of a weird juxtaposition as Mickey and a lot of his space colony mates have to stay in an old crummy space cabinets and eat like basically glorified food that doesn't look like food, but it's basically what looks like a burnt brownie and some goop, while the Marshalls eat steak and also have a very lavish dinner about it and brag about it, so much so they have their own lottery system where they do it every month, and you can have dinner with Kenneth Marshall and discuss whatever you like with him, which is again so much of a like a weird lottery system. Let's say like Logan's Run or The Island by Michael Bay, which has the lottery system in a more of a juxtaposition of a dystopian future, which is again very surprising to see. What's also plays to the director's strength is that the movie does take a lot more of a satirical route around how it's depicting a autocratic space colony and all that. It's the film somewhat reminds me of something like Terry Gilliam's Brazil, as the movie is somewhat of a Mickey take of say George Orwell's 1984, and how it's somewhat plays on it of more of a bizarrely whimsical tone, which Bong Joon Ho does play on a lot more. The movie is essentially a satire of the America and a lot of Europe, and particularly in South Korea's political state of the world, as in a autocratic leader that doesn't really know what he's doing, so everything just blows up in his face. Kind of like what happens in something like Terry Gilliam's Brazil, where it's essentially 1984, but in like 1984, it's basically in the perspective of a low worker working in a bureaucratic office, and of course wanting to be a better potential of a better person of himself. Well, this one is again someone who's somewhat aware of the fact that he's going to have to die repeatedly and over and over again, but is aware of his status amongst the other co-workers in the space colony. So he tries not to do it in a way that inflames his own ego, like in Brazil, but does it in a way that he's somewhat aware that he's completely under the thumb and there's not a lot he can do in that situation, but that's kind of the world he lives in. But kind of like Brazil and 1984, he does have a love interest, particularly being betrayed by Naomi Aki, who plays Nasha in this movie. His love interest, who's also a security agent, who's also a police officer of the space colony, and also a firefighter in the space colony as well, which is again very, very surprising that he does use that influence and the 1984 influence, as well as the Ashton Edwards novel of the same name. The visual effects in this movie are incredible, to say the least. Like, he has done visual effects work before. Like, he's done like a lot more films like that do incorporate a lot more heavier use of CGI. Let's say The Host or Okja. But I think the heaviest film before Mickey 17 was definitely Snowpiercer, which takes place on a moving train that circles around the frozen world that the characters inhabited. And this time, even though it does feature a similar climate as a frozen world that the characters inhabited and they stay largely inside to not be outside in the cold, where it's filled with bacteria and crawlers that the marshals want to essentially exterminate with a nerve gas. They essentially tested on Mickey from all over the time that he was being on the space colony, which is again, and of course the visual effects in this movie are absolutely brilliant in this movie, in my opinion, and how they depict the crawlers, which do remind me of something like Nazca and the Valley of the Wind, but like Brazil, I'm not entirely too sure if he's used that as an influence whatsoever, but I do like the visual imagery and of course how both movies have the same allegory of an environmental genocide against the harmless animals, and how one leader essentially wanting to wipe out as much of it as he can humanly get away with, and without the environmental or detrimental cost to the planet, which is again very similar allegories that both Hayao Miyazaki and Bong Joon Ho seem to bond over. But I'm not too certain if he's very out of the open if he's used that as an influence, or used a novel as a sole influence, or again used Brazil or 1984 from George Orwell as influence. But again, it's very interesting that how he's used all of them to use it into his own movies. Even though the film is thankfully not a carbon copy of his other film being Snowpiercer, like I did say earlier with the very similar world and some similar story similarities, I feel like there are definitely some minor plot twists in this movie and some interesting ideas are thrown into it, but they don't feel as visceral or as really guttural, let's say, like Parasite, where the big twist in Parasite, again, the movie has been out for over 5 years, is that there is someone else in the house the entire time, living in the basement, and it turns out it was the maid's husband that lives there. Which, again, even though I don't want to spoil Mickey 17 for you, there are some twists and some pretty solid ideas they've thrown in and used them as twists, but I don't feel they were like extremely visceral enough or just as shocking enough to stand up on their own, like say how Parasite did it, or definitely as well thought out, let's say how Snowpiercer did it. But there were definitely some thoughts about it, but I feel like it did come off like a little bit of an afterthought in my opinion. But again, we kind of knew already that Kenneth Marshall was a genocidal failed congressman who basically wants to run his own space acquisition that we'll just say has some really disturbing motives behind it. Which again, if you think knowing what Bong Joon Ho has set up about this movie, I think you kind of knew that from the back of your head, and you knew that from the get-go already. But there are like a couple of some interesting stuff he's thrown about in this movie, but I feel like again, like very interesting like twists and turns he does in this movie. But again, even though a lot of them were pretty good in my opinion, like how he does it in Mickey 17, but it doesn't come out as visceral or really as thought-provoking, let's say, as Parasite, which takes things on a whole different level. Bong Joon Ho's first film in 6 years was definitely a welcome addition to his own filmography. Even though it isn't as strong, let's say, as Parasite, the movie's themes and tone is definitely on point. The film's visual language is definitely there, and of course his trademark depiction of like class warfare, and of course film's politics and his politics definitely do shine through in this movie. The performances of Robert Pattinson is also great. Naomi Aki is also great in this movie. Steven Yeun, who's there but very briefly in the movie, and also Tony Cornell and Mark Ruffalo are both very comically sinister and somewhat whimsical to essentially carry the movie through. It, of course, does match the tone of what Bong Joon Ho sets out in his previous movie as well as this movie, and definitely the film's themes of colonialism and genocide, and of course the conversations around human cloning are definitely very strong and very interesting, and of course some twists, even though they weren't as very strong and very pointed, like say, as Parasite. But again, at the end of the day, this is a very good, well done performance of Robert Pattinson, and a very well done film by Bong Joon Ho, and definitely so much so after coming back from his revolutionary Parasite movie, this is definitely a really good follow up. I can say the least. So for Mickey 17, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this one. So, what do you think of Mickey 17? Follow me on social medias like Twitter and Instagram, Letterboxd, Blue Sky Threads. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and of course comment below, and dislike as well. And bye.